police right away, and they said, get dressed, get ready, we're on our way, we'll get the FBI, we'll all be there. So they came, and I told them again what the man said, and they said, well, we have to decide what to do. And the man had said that he had made a reservation for me on board in my name. So we're sitting here deliberating about what to do with the FBI. They wanted me to get on the plane and go to take the trip. And it was the police lieutenant who just sat here and just pounded the table and said, you cannot send her. You have to send a policewoman dressed like her because they want her to take the small plane into Kansas City. He said there's a lot of ways to get to Tulsa other than using that route. But they wanted me on that small plane because it unloaded out on the tarmac. They didn't use a jetway. And the police here were afraid that there might be a sniper in Kansas City waiting. And if I made it somehow miraculously through Kansas City, that there would be somebody waiting in Tulsa and I'd never come back to Des Moines again. Well, the FBI said that they couldn't make a decision locally. They would have to go back to their office and call Washington for instructions. So at that point I said, well, did anybody bother to call the airline and find out if this turkey really did make a reservation for me? So they called the airline from here, and the reservationist said that someone had called in on the 800 number after midnight and made a reservation in my name on that flight. So then they knew this was serious. And by the time the day progressed, the flight left at 4:59, so they had to make some fast decisions. They finally did agree to send a policewoman, but it was only after the FBI offered me money to go. They offered to pay for all of my flight, food, rental car, everything, and send a plainclothesman to stay with me at all times. And I refused. I said, no, this is what the warning was earlier this week. I'm not going to patrol. I was advised not to, and I'm not going to. So they sent a policewoman in my place, and they caught the guy who approached her, and he's now serving time in the Oklahoma penitentiary.
Are trying to figure out.
It was a panel discussion on Satanism and pedophilia, a tough topic on Michelson in the Morning. Information from a panelist divulged key facts regarding the 1982 kidnapping of paperboy Johnny Gosch. Information Noreen Gosch says her investigators have been secretly working on.
For 14 years.
Author John Zielinski says it involves an informant close to the case.
Because he has identified him as Johnny Gosch and said, I saw him over the years as I traveled the country. He might have accompanied the man who kidnapped Johnny Gosch when he was only about 13 or 14 years old.
Paul Bonacci has a photographic memory. He can remember every day, every place, every person, every scar, and he has identified Johnny Gosch. He helped to kidnap Johnny Gosch. He was only 12 or 13 at the time, and he was taken along. He also identified the fact that in 1987, when Mrs. Gosch was threatened, when they were told their children would be killed if they revealed that they thought the North American Man-Boy Love Association was the kidnapped ring, at that very time, Paul Bonacci was making a pornographic film with Johnny Gosch, who was a slave in a house of prostitution in Colorado.
I'm Judy Ann Denson Gerber. I am a psychiatrist and a lawyer, and have been practicing since 1967. At that time, my major interest was in drug abuse, and I founded the Odyssey House programs across the United States, in Australia, New Zealand, and in Hong Kong. By 1985, however, I began to see a new phenomenon. And that phenomenon was that the patients that I was seeing, many of whom had dissociative disorders, post-traumatic stress, which I've talked about, but also multiple personality, and therefore could only remember fragments of what had happened to them, but these fragments were coming out in their 30s, began to remember ritualistic cult abuse. And to my sadness, having been a religious major in college, I realized that there were many people who used their children in the worship of the Prince of Darkness, Satan, Lucifer, Isis, which is an Egyptian princess of darkness, actually, married to the king of the underworld.
Osiris.
And that we had many, many victims of this type of activity. Someone who had knew that this was my field and knew that there were implications of ritual and satanic cult abuse in the Nebraska Franklin Credit Union scandal and embezzlement of funds, and that the major witness in that, Paul Bonacci, happened to be a victim himself at a very early age of child molestation, had been a boy prostitute, had been in porn pictures, had also, according to his statements, participated in 5 cult murders, and was a multiple personality, very much like Sybil is the one that I'm sure most people will know, 3 Faces of Eve, that because he was a multiple personality, and since I was an expert in disassociation and multiplicity, would I see him for the purposes of whether or not he was credible. When interviewing Paul Bonacci, he definitely said that he had seen Gosh, and he had seen Gosh on 2 separate occasions in a child white slave house. He also described that Gosh had an unusual birthmark. This birthmark was not part of the general information. And when he shared that with Mr. Gosh and then eventually with Mrs. Gosh, they said that it had to be their son. Now, this would have been about at least 4 years after the initial kidnapping occurred. To me, the fact that he had seen this young man alive in a child white slave house could describe a physical aspect that was not a usual one, that the parents themselves said that they believed that he had seen their son, definitely deserved to be looked into. I mean, that isn't something you can just turn aside. Interestingly enough, I had a very, what will I say, goose-pimply kind of experience with Bonacci, in that when we were talking about another very famous child, Etan Paez, who is Pate, as some people pronounce it, whose parents have, as the Goshes have, spent endless hours searching for their lost son, and much pain. Actually, I did ask, have you seen him? And he said he didn't know, and he wasn't sure. And then I received a letter from him about a month later from many of his different personalities. They write me separately. And one of them said to me, Dr. Densker, I wasn't totally honest with you. I didn't tell you everything because I had seen you on December 28, 1982 at a rally at the Holiday Inn in New York, and you were pointed out to me by David Thorstadt, the head of the North American Man-Boy Love Association, which is called NAMULA, which I have the distinction and honor in my mind to be public enemy number 1 of. I do not agree that young boys should be aroused to erection at 6 months of age when they're being diapered by their mothers so that they learn what the, in quotes, equipment is for, end quotes. I just think that this is a travesty, will increase the Oedipal conflict, that this is not something mothers should do. This is not something that should happen to children when they're being diapered. Children should be loved without being sexually approached. But he said to me in 1990 that he had seen me in, actually in 1982 at such and such a place, at such and such a time, and had been told that I was marked to die. And therefore he was afraid of what he could or couldn't tell me and what would happen to me. I went back and checked my diary, and I was exactly where he said I was. Those are the kinds of things that convinced me that there was a great deal in what Bonacci was saying in Nebraska that had to be further investigated. And that to bring him up on charges for lying for the grand jury when they haven't investigated. I'll give you a perfect example. One of the alleged perpetrators was also told by everyone that he had a large abdominal scar. It would seem to me I don't think you can be a physician, that if you're told by someone that X has a large abdominal scar and that he is a perpetrator of pedophilia, all you have to do is look at the man's abdomen. If does he or does he not have the scar? No one to this day has ever looked at this person's abdomen, nor has he been willing to show his abdomen. I mean, if I were an innocent person accused of a heinous crime of constantly buying boy prostitutes, I'd sure as shoot be willing to show whether or not I had an appendectomy scar, an abdominal scar, if I didn't have one. It would only be if I had one that I would stay buttoned up.
Okay. It's going to be a murder. If you don't want to look, turn away.
You all know what a snuff film is? Snuff film is what it implicates. You snuff out a candle, well, you snuff out a life in this film. And Paul Bonacci has taken part in a film in which he had sex with a boy, both before and after he was killed.
As I got to know more about Bonacci, and he wrote me letters, and I listened to his descriptions of the rites of the different sects that he had been in, of the killings, of who performed the fetal Eucharist, which is the actual drinking of the blood and eating or cannibalizing of the child or the newborn or the abortus, or an adult in some instances. I discovered that everything he said fit into, one would say, the traditional rites of the Antichrist sects.
He had conducted human sacrifice. She said, I gave him all kinds of quizzes, which if he wasn't part of the satanic circle and he hadn't achieved the various steps of Satanism, he wouldn't know. I said to him, did you ever eat the eyes? And he said, no, because my other personality, Christian, wouldn't let me go to the ceremony that night. Now, eating the eyes means that you're high up in the hierarchy of Satanism, and you pluck the eyes out of a human and eat them.
We were going to discuss, say, communion in the Roman Catholic Church. It would be the same in Rome, and in England, and in France, and in Australia, and in China, and wherever Roman Catholicism were practiced. Well, the Satanists do the same thing, so that when they are performing certain rites, they have the dagger, and it's a similar dagger throughout the world, with which they do the killings. They have the communion plate, which has certain markings on it. They have the chalice. They have the stilo or stiletto, with which a newborn's child is punctured. Heart is punctured by the mother, actually, of this child. That mother can be as young as 12 or 13, which is very frightening. And then she draws out that blood. There is other rituals, which he discussed. And only certain priests or certain levels in the hierarchy are permitted to do those rituals. And he knew every single ritual correctly and who was to do them. So there was no doubt in my mind that he had intimate personal knowledge.
I've talked to many Paul Bonaccis who told the same basic story. People from Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, Northern California, Southern California, Washington, and people are telling the same story throughout the United States.
It used to be that the bodies were cremated. There were arrangements with funeral parlors, and the children in Nebraska who were involved in this described situations in which they had a human sacrifice in the house. They hacked the body up. They stuck it in a couple of gunny sacks, plastic bags, good husky ones, and took it out to the car and took it away to the funeral parlor and cremated the whole remains. There are children who described being trained on cats to insert a knife up the rectum of a cat and rip it open as a training to doing the same with live babies. And the woman who got on cable access television and said, the foster children I've had in my home, and she was a very brave lady, and she took the worst foster children, the foster children that no one else would take. And one by one, they began to tell her about being involved in these satanic things. And she said one girl at Christmas time lay on the floor and screamed for 2.5 hours. She said, I can't get the sound of the babies crying out of my head. Christmas is the worst time because that's when we kill the most babies.
The children I have talked to have all had to murder before the age of 2. I mentioned that last week, and we kind of went right on past it. That is something that is beyond anything I could comprehend.
Right.
But in some way, whether with the help of an adult's hand over theirs, or by having them practice, by getting them excited to be part of the adult scene. These children have never seen a normal life, for goodness sakes. They do murder. And the evil thing that happens is they really believe they want to. They want to do what the older people are doing, and they're praised for that. And that becomes their goal, to be like the adults and to do these horrible things. There is a little part in them that I believe we all have, that natural, good, God-given part that knows it's wrong. But in a group and in the excitement of everything, they want to do that. They enjoy the sex. Children are capable of enjoying the sex. That was something I didn't know. Well, you know, why would they fight against it? A child will eat a bag of candy if you give it to them. They will take part in these things willingly. When they get out and begin to talk, that's very difficult for them to realize. We didn't realize it at first, that they actually wanted to do that, and that is part of the very sophisticated brainwashing job that they do on all of these children. The part that made me to believe this child's story was that when he finally said, this baby, he talked about several, but this particular baby had been killed, stabbed again, different way, but stabbed. He curled up in a fetal position. He was 9 years old when he was telling this story. He curled up in a fetal position, and his eyes got real glazed, and he said, they cooked that baby on the grill.
Oh, my gosh.
And I thought, he has really flipped out. I mean, I didn't know. And he said, oh, gross, it smelled like rotten chicken or rotten deer. He then went on and told us how they would cut out the heart, or they would cut off the sex organs. They would save them in the refrigerator, in the freezer. And this is a very typical thing that these kids talk about. They worship the sex organs. I suppose they're so into themselves, and it is life and nature and all of that. I don't, and it's very decadent, deviant. It is nothing a Christian person would care to even hear about. So that is part of the reason I'm sure that they do that. But he witnessed that, and they kept it for another ceremony. They will always use these bodies one way or another. I didn't get any answers from that child about what happened to the bodies. Where did they go? Eventually, the little ones that I was talking about first talked about throwing the babies in the fire. And I asked about that. And you mean they were dead and then they threw them in the fire? And the littlest one said, no, them was alive and them threw them, you know, like this. The most horrible story about fire that I have to tell, and this is extremely disturbing, was a little girl. She is a teenager as she was telling me this story. And she was describing the barn where they used to go to have their meetings. And she told how they would gather outside of the barn and do their chanting. And then as they went on into the barn, they would be split into different groups. And she was never with any of her family. They all went to different places. And I asked her where she had to go, and she said, oh, I was always in the burning room. And as she went on and described the burning room, I thought, how she came out of this with any sanity at all, I don't know. She was very small child. They would take young children, and we're probably talking preschoolers. I don't think that they dealt much with the older ones. And they would hang them from a rafter in this barn. And there would be as many as 5 to 10 hung in a row. And they would be fully clothed, which is unusual because frequently they are all naked. The children, like this girl, were all given candles. And you can picture the ceremony as she described it. And the candles were lit one by one. Then the adults would go forward and they would pour from a cup some liquid on each of the children's clothing, which is obviously gasoline or kerosene. We didn't know that then. And then after whatever it was they had to do, they would give the signal, and these others would have to go forward and set the children on fire. when they were done, they would just cut them down. The first child that this girl had to kill was a cousin, a little cousin. You know, what does that do to you? What does it do to your insides? But you couldn't object because the children that objected were killed. Frequently, she said, people would come. They'd come as families, like we would go to some big festive gathering, not knowing that their child would be sacrificed. And she would describe the screams of the parents when they realized that their child had been killed. And she talked about them being cut down and how they would draw a circle around the body. And when she first told me those things, I knew she was telling the truth. It wasn't that, but I didn't understand it. And I still can't tell you every answer, but I know that circles are important. And during these rituals, they will draw the circles, or in some way they will have a circle, because they believe that these demons that come can't break through the circle to harm them. She had also told about how the parents would kneel outside that circle where the child had fallen to, like, pray to the child, is what she said. I've been told by people that know a lot more than I do that the reason for all of this death and murder is because of the belief in the demons and the power that they can get from that. And these people believe that the more innocent the victim, the more horrible the death, the closer you are at the moment of death, the more magic is released and the more spiritual power they get.
Are working with the North American Man-Boy Love Association to market children. And they're also running the drugs.
There are certain, like for instance, Jerry Samando with Chicago Police Department. He's certainly doing something about this. The Sheriff's Office in Los Angeles and the LAPD have an officer who's in charge of satanic crimes. Unfortunately, many of these officers do not have a real good grasp on the situation. Many times they have a tendency to believe that it's more like street gangs where they write the satanic graffiti on the wall, but it's much deeper than that, as you know. There are police officers.
Just let me stop you here. Isn't the street gang essentially just the bottom rung delivery boys in this?
Well, there's various levels of this ritualistic activity, as I'm sure you're aware of.
Right, and we're talking oftentimes about important people, doctors, lawyers.
Absolutely. It goes much further beyond the street gangs than people realize. It goes up into the professional people.
But the street gangs are operating with the drugs and with the child kidnapping, I believe.
That's right.
And in Des Moines, I have found an area where the gangs meet underneath the bridge. And it said on there, and missing children are dead.
I hope I'm going to sicken you in a minute. You may want not to watch all of this. But this is a video that comes out of the video store in Washington, Iowa, and your 15-year-old or your 14-year-old could go and check it out. Because it is not a rated video, it is a documentary of a life situation or a death situation. A woman. And this is a human sacrifice. And this is part of the video with all the faces of death. Cutting her open. This was shown to a group of us in Nebraska, the Nebraska Leadership Conference. I went out there to attend this to find out what was going on. And Ely Orr, a Kansas City homicide detective, showed this. And he said, this is available in any town in America. And my first thought on seeing this was it must be a porn store. It must be a town big enough to have a pornographic video store. And that's not true. Does anybody know Shreve, Ohio? Do you know how small Shreve, Ohio is? Do you know Millersburg? Do you know Goshen? All of these towns have it. Do you know Washington? They don't have a video store in Kelowna, so there's no place I could look. Iowa City, all over the place. It is everywhere in this country. And what's more, when I step up to a store and ask if they've got it, I stopped in Millersburg at a grocery store, and they said, we don't have it. kind of thing. And I said, how many people are asking for it? And who is seeing this? Young people. And what is happening after they see something like this?
There's every indication that the occult groups have established preschools across the country and even overseas. I know of a preschool in Australia, and I know of some in Europe that were actually organized by Americans. And they use these preschools, number one, to recruit the children, ages 2 to 4 to 5, and also they use these children in their ritual ceremonies.
Going on 22 years old, she's been in solitary confinement longer than any other woman in Nebraska history. What she did was talk to the Nebraska legislature, talk to the Franklin Committee, and tell them what had happened to her from the age of 12. The FBI warned her she'd spend a long time in prison if she didn't recant. She's a born-again Christian. She's been in solitary confinement with nothing to read but her Bible. And they thought, we're going to break this lady, we're going to break this girl. And she said, not till I die will I give up, will I recant my story. And there are a group of people in Nebraska called the Nebraska Leadership Council. And they're working now with a petition, and I'm supposed to have a copy of that petition soon sent to me. And in that petition, they're going to ask for her unconditional release. Now, what I'm saying to you is Alicia Owens is America's youngest political prisoner. Who put her there? The FBI and others. Why? Because one of the things she said was, I saw a vice president, then a president, at these parties in Washington, D.C. Now, Judy Ann Denson Gerber confirms this. She's a friend of the president. She grew up with him, and she says, I am rethinking my relationship to him because of what I now know is going on. And I was told, don't mention names. So I'm going to say to you, in this state, I feel that everyone from the governor on down should be voted out of office. In the state of Nebraska, I feel the same thing. In the U.S. Congress, I feel the same thing.
Owned one newspaper man, not one journalist in this state, not the Cedar Rapids Gazette, not the Des Moines Register, not the Quad City Times, not the Dubuque Telegraph Herald, all of which have run stories on me, not one of them willing to pick up the telephone and make one single telephone call to begin verifying the truth of what I'm saying. I have been dismissed out of hand. Bill Casey, publisher of the Daily Iowan, is so incensed by my very appearance that he goes absolutely stark raving mad.
You're going out of here. No.
What reason?
You have no right in your videotape.
What reason do you have to kick me out when I'm only seeking to give you?
Most people do not come in here with cameras. There's a court injunction against you, John Zelensky, for giving this information. That's what the court told me. Now get out of this building. The cops are going to be here in 30 seconds.
It is not the information that I am trying to give you now. It has nothing to do.
I don't want to talk to you. You've been a pain in my ass for 4 or 5 years. I don't want you in here.
I'm saying
you have no. You turn that off, or I'm going to punch you.
I want to ask you this. Do you, in effect, this is what I found out. I went into the Daily Iowan to give them this tape. Now, this
You harassed her. Turn it off, I said. You're going to get it. This is a public building. Yes, but this is not public space. I'm not in that building. I'm in the
we're not in. That's
all right.
Your space.
The cops will be here in a minute.
Okay.
Now,
we'll go up.
You know this guy?
We'll go up and talk.
You know he's crazy?
We'll go up.
You're acting crazy. Okay. I'm threatening him because this guy's threatened us for 5 years.
You
have no right in our newsroom.
What have I threatened?
Hey, you have libeled me. Hey, listen, buddy.
If I have libeled you, then I suggest
you have no money. Your lawyer told me you have not a cent in the world. Don't bother suing you.
Okay, let's go.
Go.
Now, why is it that a man of your supposed stature...
I do the same thing that Jim Leach's office does. Everybody in the state. You have no business talking to you. You have no right to You're crazy.
Are you saying that newspapers have no business listening to anything I have to say?
When you come here, you talk to us for 3 hours. As soon as we disagree with you, you start calling us motherfucker and every other word in the world. You're the craziest guy.
I have never heard the word motherfucker or anything like that from me. I do not use the kind of language you use.
That's not your land, and you know it. I don't have to argue with you, Jimmy.
Now, I want to say one thing, would you
Here, you want to listen to that?
No.
Then why do you put it in my face?
You want to listen to that?
Yeah, give it to me, I'll listen to it. But I don't want to have to sit here and listen to you.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll mail this back to you. You have your address? You got a card to give me?
This goes along with it.
All right.
Now, this does not come from me.
You turn it on.
And I have confirmed with Senator Lauren Schmidt of the Nebraska legislature the truth of this matter that I give you. I now have been talking to John and Noreen Gosh, and I will be taping John and Noreen Gosh about the kidnapping of children and about its association with Iowa.
All right. We will listen to this and we'll send it back to you.
All right. And you will send a letter saying that you have listened to it and send it back. And yet, what have I said of Bill Casey? That Bill Casey has acted inappropriately, that he has acted irresponsibly. I have not called him names, I have not made threats. And yet you would think I was threatening to do something horrible to him.